Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Ryan with Sawdust and Stuff, and today I'm going to walk you through the journey of creating your own jointer jig for your table saw. Before we dive into the jig itself, I wanted to make sure and address why I'm creating this jig. I've got the G0814 joiner, and that's a 6-inch cutter head with a 48-inch bed, but the reality is when you're using a joiner, a good rule of thumb is to not join a board that's more than 2 times the length of the joiner bed. In this case, anything longer than 96 inches. Now that's the rule of thumb, but I struggle to have anything over about 70 inches come out with a clean jointed surface after using this machine, so I want to find a way around that. This joiner jig I'm creating will go ahead and allow me to use this jig on any length of board for a clean straight line rip down one edge using the jig, only to flip it over and run the other side through the table saw and get that second glue ready edge. So let's go.
As with any shop project I do, I started at the scrap bin. I grabbed some 3/4 inch plywood for my material. I grabbed the toggle clamps that I picked up at my local hardware store, a handful of screws, any kind of screws will do, and I use CA glue, but this is really optional for this project. The very first cut that you'll make will be straightening and squaring up one side of your material. I'm doing this here with a track saw, but you can also accomplish this with a circular saw or a table saw. You just need to make sure your cut is completely straight and completely square. Doing this will allow you to have a good, true cut on your next step. That next step, of course, is going to be pulling your material to the table saw, setting your fence to about 2.5 inches, and cutting the length of material that you need. In this case, I needed 2 lengths as my scrap was not long enough to make the whole jig, but I later regretted using this scrap as it didn't work out for me, but you'll see more about that later. Then, I simply grabbed my next piece of material and I repeated the same 2 steps, making sure I get both sides co-parallel with each other and perfectly square. Next up, I grabbed the CA glue and applied a pretty liberal amount to the bottom side of the jig fence. And off camera, I also screwed these in, making sure they were aligned as closely together as possible. But the only way to make these perfectly flush was to cut them together, and so I pulled my track saw out one more time and did just that. What you see me doing here is wasting my time. I threw a washer under these toggle clamps and screwed them in, evenly spaced along that new fence that I just attached with the glue and the screws, before I realized that this just wasn't going to work out. As you can see here, this big dummy forgot to account for the table saw fence. This clamp wasn't high enough up to get clearance over that fence, so I had to unassemble the jig, rip a 3/4 inch piece instead of a 1/2 inch piece for the new fence, and I repeated the steps we just went through. This time, when I screwed the toggle clamps in, I added a spacer made from more scrap material to make sure this clearance was enough clearance this time. I didn't want to make the same mistake twice. And then the last step that I took was adjusting these toggle clamps to make sure that they had the right distance to catch the piece of wood I was going to cut, and also the right depth to make sure they clamp down with full force, keeping that piece in place. Now I could end this video right here, but I wanted to show you this jig in action. So I've grabbed a piece of 6/4 red oak, clamped it down using all 3 clamps, making sure the pressure was all the way down, and I ran it through the table saw. You'll want to make sure that you have reset your fence to the proper width and the blade to the proper height. And when you do this first cut, you will notice there is a lack of dust control. That's because the piece of wood is elevated from the surface of the table saw, effectively eliminating the suction or the vacuum's ability to grab that dust. So you're just going to have to put up with it. The most important thing when making this cut is making sure the fence of the jig is flush with the fence of the table saw. Then you'll pull your board out of that jig. You will flip it over, running the new cut edge along the table saw fence. Adjust the width of the table saw fence to accommodate your board. Lower the blade to a safe level and run that board once again through the table saw. Make sure when you're doing this, you are cutting and eliminating the least amount of material possible. This will just save you wood and eliminate scrap, thus saving you money. Off camera, I grabbed the second board in this glue up, ran it through using the jig because I wanted to show you the results. As you can see, you've got a ready to glue joint, and you didn't even need to use a joiner. Just a simple shop jig.
And that's really all there is to it. Just an hour or two later, and I've got a jig that will help me get perfectly jointed boards for every tabletop or any other project I need to make. For you, it might help you save a couple $100 on a joiner that just doesn't fit the bill and help you save up towards one that really can do long boards well. Thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'd love it if you could support by hitting the like or subscribe button below.